email. When I was in rabbinical school, I took a class on the Zohar, on the primary text that's the basis for Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah. And as the final assignment for that class, Dr. Sharon Corin asked us to write a paper on one passage from the Zohar and explain it, translate it and explain it. But she knew that we didn't know a ton of passages from the Zohar off the top of our head, so she made a list of suggested passages that we could choose from. And on the list, I saw a passage that was labeled something like mezuzahs and demons, and I thought, I am going to write that paper. And so I studied this passage from the Zohar that is about mezuzahs and how mezuzahs can protect us from demons. Because the Zohar is full of something that is actually a rich tradition in Judaism that we don't talk very much in liberal Jewish spaces, which is demonology. Elaborate descriptions of all sorts of demons that exist in the world that want to do you harm and do harm through you. And the Zohar says that there is this particular demon that sits outside your door of your house, and he sits to the left of the door, and he wants to bring bad mojo to you every time you walk through your door. When you walk into your house, the mezuzah that is hanging on the right side of your door helps to protect you from the evil of that demon. And I've been thinking a little bit of late about doorways and about closing doors and about what we are trying to keep out when we close doors, especially in this time of social distancing and stay-at-home orders, and what we are trying to close out when we close. And I've been thinking about that also on Pesach, because the very first use of the word mezuzot in the Torah comes from the commandment that God gives through Moses, that the Israelites should take the lamb's blood before the 10th plague and paint it on the mezuzot, on the doorposts of their houses, and that's going to serve as an oath, as a sign to the angel of death that will then know to pass over their houses. And I imagine that as the Israelites were painting their doorposts with this blood, they were thinking to themselves, like, is this door, this wooden door, and is this paint and this blood going to be enough to protect us from this plague that is happening outside our homes? And I've been thinking about the power of those images of the mezuzah that we place as a sign maybe of protection, and of the blood on the doorpost in the Passover story, and remembering a story from the Talmud that sort of encapsulates that feeling of wanting protection. It's a story about Onkelos, who was a convert to Judaism and was also the nephew of the Roman Emperor Titus. And when Onkelos converted to Judaism, Titus was not thrilled about this because it looked bad on him. And so he sent some of his advisors to go and talk Onkelos out of being Jewish and back into being of the Roman religion. And Onkelos was so impassioned about his Judaism and so eloquent that the advisors, after spending a little bit of time with Onkelos, they converted to Judaism also, which, as you can imagine, did not thrill Titus. And so Titus sent some legionnaires, some of his guards from his palace guard, to go and arrest Onkelos. And he told them, when you go, you're going to arrest him, but you cannot talk to him, because he's starting to get the sense that the minute that Onkelos talks, that his folks are in trouble. So they go and they arrest him, and they're dragging him out of his house. And as they're dragging him out of his house, he pulls away from them, and he reaches up to touch the mezuzah that's on the door frame of his house and kiss it. And the soldiers are so struck by this, and that they forget that their commandment is to not talk to him. And they say, "What was that about?" And he said, "Oh, well, this is the difference between your people and my people. For you, you're the guards outside the king's palace, and you make sure that no harm comes to the king. But in my religion, our King of Kings, our ruler, our God, sits outside our door to protect us." And he quotes the line from Psalms where David says, "God will guard your comings out and your goings in," as an example of God sitting at our doorpost, making sure that we are safe and protected. And that image is so moving and so powerful to these members of the Roman legion that, of course, they too convert to Judaism. And I'm thinking about how much we are praying in these services that we are doing on Zoom. and how much we are praying in our own lives in our quiet moments for that protective presence of God to sit outside our doors and keep us safe. And I'm thinking about the way that we are praying for that Sukkot Shlomecha, that shelter of God's peace, to be spread over all of our homes in this difficult, challenging time. But then I'm remembering that Maimonides, who was always the rationalist, said that the mezuzah has nothing to do with protecting you from evil spirits. Maimonides says that the mezuzah is so that every time you walk by the door, you think about God. And it has nothing to do with any kind of demons. He hadn't read the Zohar yet, but it has nothing to do with any kind of demons, and everything to do with what's happening inside of us. He says that the challenge is not that we are trying to change God by putting a mezuzah on our house and make God protect us. The challenge is to keep us focused on who we are, on our highest ideals, on who we're trying to be. And this is actually matched in the Pesach example, because in Passover, Rashi notes that there's this strange phrase in the verse that commands the Israelites to paint the doorposts of their house. It says that it should be a sign, ot lachem, a sign to them. And Rashi says, well, why should it be assigned to them and not assigned to God or assigned to the angel of death? And furthermore, God and the angel of death don't need to know where Jews live. They already know that. They don't need a sign to remind them, oh, yeah, that's a Jewish house and that's not. They've got that figured out. They've got that under control. So who is it a sign for? Rashi says it's a sign for us, that actually the blood wasn't on the outside doorpost of the house, but on the inside doorpost of the house. And it was there to remind the Israelites not to go out, to remind them that they had to change their behavior also, not just God changing God's behavior. That even though they were afraid, and even though they weren't sure what was happening outside, and even so they weren't sure how dangerous it was, they had to constantly remind themselves to stay in and stay safe. And that the blood on the doorpost was about changing their behavior. I watched a video this week from a very angry nurse who had clearly been to the grocery store, and she had seen some people who were wearing gloves, and but they were not making themselves any safer. And she wanted to explain to people why they weren't making themselves any safer. She said, if you wear your gloves at the grocery store, but you continue to like touch all of the refrigerator, freezer doors, and you touch all the food that's been touched by other people, and you touch your cell phone, and you touch your arms, and you touch your face, or you put your cell phone to your face, that your gloves haven't prevented the germs. And she said in this video, it might make you feel safer, but unless you actually act different when you're wearing the gloves, it's not going to actually make you safer. And what I think is actually very powerful about the image of the mezuzah and the image of the blood on the doorposts is that they are about not only maybe making a change in God and maybe making a change in the world, but also about reminding us that we have to change our own behavior. Even the Zohar page that I studied with Dr. Koren makes the same point, because it doesn't say that the mezuzah is some kind of force field that the demon can't get through. It says that every time you walk past the demon, you look the other direction, you lift your eyes up towards God, you see God's name on the outside of the mezuzah, and that reminds you to be your highest self, to be living in line with your ideals, and then that evil, that demon can't touch you. And so I think that the challenge for all of us in this moment is, as we close our doors, as we make responsible choices, as we put on our masks and our gloves and we do things to protect ourselves, to protect our families, and to protect perfect strangers, is also to challenge ourselves to say, it's not just about the symbols that we paint on our door, it's about how do we change our behavior. And how do we live to our highest ideals? If we are committed to being, as a Jewish people, a light unto the nations, then we are going to have to figure out ways to have our light shine even brighter when we are staying inside our houses. And if we are committed as a Jewish people to doing the work of justice and making justice roll down like waters, then we are going to have to figure out how to do that in a time when we can't go outside in the rain. And if we are committed to being emissaries of God's love and God's peace in this world, we're going to have to figure out how to do that for people at a distance when we cannot do that for them in person. And we are called and challenged not only to pray and not only to ask for God to make a change in this world, though we are doing that too, but also to look at those symbols, those signs, those otot that we are setting for ourselves, and to remind us that we have to make a change. The coronavirus doesn't understand doors. The coronavirus doesn't know that you've closed your door and so it won't come in. And I would argue that injustice, that brokenness, that heartache, that fear, those things also don't understand doors. They don't know that we've closed our doors. What they know is when we've changed our behavior. And if we are committed to the work of making a more just and whole and beautiful world, especially in these moments of darkness, this night of watching like Pesach night, then we are challenged to paint our doorposts, to put up our mezuzah, to put on our gloves and our masks, but also to change our behavior, to work for ourselves and for each other, to build the world that we imagine. Shabbat Shalom.